Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and with us this evening is State Representative Simon Cataldo, who represents the 14th Middlesex District. And Simon, we're glad to have you back. I think this might be your fourth appearance, but who's keeping track?
Who's keeping track at this point? I'm happy to be here for number 4, 5, 6, or whatever it is.
Vilo's keeping track. He'll tell us later, I'm sure. So just to situate the viewers a little bit, Simon is one of 3 state representatives for the town of Chelmsford, and you have the largest district in Chelmsford, I believe. So it's precincts 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and you also represent the entire town of Carlisle, which I'm guessing is what, around 4,000 people, 4,500, something like that. Precincts 1, 2, 6, and 7 in Acton, and precincts 1, 2, and 3 in Concord, which is where you live.
That's right.
But you don't represent yourself. Who's your rep?
It's actually 1, 2, and 5.
Okay.
I'm my
sorry.
rep.
Okay. Oh, you are.
You had it right on
I
your
had
notes,
it right.
Sam. Yes.
Of course. Well, you see, maybe I should put my glasses on. There we go. All right. Again, now I can play the age card, right? I'm 77. I'm allowed to make these mistakes. So it's great to have you back. And you have obviously completed 1 2-year term, and you've been reelected to a second term, okay? And you overwhelmingly crushed your opposition in both the primary and the general election. So tough campaign, right?
Well, you know, democracy is about choices. I think we should have more competitive elections. Happy to talk about that. In this particular instance, on the ticket for state rep, that wasn't the case.
Well, it wasn't, and we had an awful lot of blanks. And generally what I do, when the race is blanked, when the race is unopposed like that, even if I'm okay with the incumbent, I usually leave it blank, because my theory is that somebody's counting those blanks. You know, and if there are enough blanks, maybe the opposition party will field a candidate for the next time. That could be just wishful thinking on my part, but that's what I do. But in your case, I put the X in for Simon Cataldo.
Well, thank you, Sam. And I think, you know, you're in good company in terms of that that approach. I certainly count the blanks. I think a lot of other folks do.
There you go. So you did have 1 term, 2 years, and can you tell us a little bit about what you were able to accomplish in that first term, and then perhaps lead into where you think you might be going in your second term?
It's been a great 2 years. I have thoroughly enjoyed the work. We've talked about this a little bit before, but when I was on the campaign trail leading up to being elected, the number one thing that I heard from residents in Chelmsford was about Chapter 70. And so to me, the number one, and for those who are watching who may not know, if they watch your show, they know, but some folks may not know, that has to do with the state aid for local schools, local public schools. And for a long time, Chelmsford had been receiving an inequitable share when you looked at some other surrounding towns. There was an 18% increase in my first year. We did significant funding, a full funding, our second year of the Student Opportunity Act, which helped to get us on the right path. Now, I think there's a lot more we can do on that, but we took major step forwards in terms of state funding for our local schools in Chelmsford, which, as you know, Sam, affects far more than just the families that have students in the school district. It affects the entire town fisc. We have a long ways to go on that. We had historic funding for early childhood education and child care, the so-called CCC grants, the Commonwealth Care Grants. Affordable child care is a major driver of some of the economic challenges that we're experiencing in Massachusetts. Affordability across the board, but for young families who want to move into these communities, take advantage of our world-class public school system, that is a big challenge. We had major investments in that this session. We made a significant dent, I think, or we put the ingredients in place to make a significant dent in our housing situation in Massachusetts, led by my colleague representing Chelmsford as well, Representative Jim Arciero. He led on a housing bond bill, which will make a historic investment in the ability to create more housing. We have a supply-demand problem in Massachusetts. We are losing young professionals who can't or don't want to pay for the very high costs of housing in the greater Boston area where they want to launch their careers and start their families, and so they're moving elsewhere. That's creating fiscal problems. That's creating a lot of problems here in Massachusetts. So he and we took a major step forward in that. There are also some important policy provisions in that bill to, for instance, give tax credits to developers who want to turn commercial real estate into residential real estate. We have an oversupply now of commercial in the greater Boston region. Turning that into homes is good policy. I could go on and on. Those are some of the things that
That's
I care
a
most
good
about.
one, and that's interesting you bring that up because we talked about that 20 years ago, and I thought because back then we had vacancies in the commercial properties, and I was always one who favored adaptive reuse versus building, and that was relative to 40Bs. They were building affordable housing back then. And I thought, it's a real shame that we have to go into neighborhoods, and in some cases we have to knock down homes, or we have to go on virgin land and cut down trees to build these 40Bs. When we have the commercial space available, it's not being utilized, and it's too bad that there isn't some incentive for private developers, because that's really what we're talking about. It has to make sense financially for them to do it. Otherwise, they're going to go to the least cost method of doing it. So I'm glad to hear that. I think that's a great initiative. Let's use the resources we have before we go off and build things we really don't need to build. Okay.
Right.
So
right.
That's great. So 2 years coming up. More of the same. Any new initiatives on the horizon?
I think so. This is the part of the time of the year of the session where we're looking at what's going to happen in the next 2-year session, what kind of bills we may be looking to file, and as we look at the landscape, I think there's a lot of uncertainty fiscally. We're getting that from every direction. Every reputable source is saying we may be facing fiscal headwinds, and so I think there are going to be some hard decisions to make in terms of where we're going. My interest is in protecting my district, residents of Chelmsford, Carlisle, Acton, Concord, from any types of financial challenges that may make an impact on our lives. I was just at the Chelmsford Select Board meeting last night,
Yes.
and what dominated the conversation was the dynamics that we have between inflation, Prop 2.5, and the general cost of living, the cost of running a business or, in this case, a municipality. Those are very real challenges. We're seeing them this occur all over the state. In particular, right now, I think what's gotten the most news is on the North Shore. Teachers are making reasonable demands that their salaries keep up with the cost of living increases, and towns are saying we can't afford that.
Right.
And then you're kind of between a rock and a hard place in that situation. So that is, I think, what I'm most focused on, because the local services and some of the state health and human services that are provided are essential. That's what state government does. It's the core of what state government does. Healthcare, our roads, our transportation, making sure people can get safely to work, and making sure that we have strong public schools. That's the bread and butter of this job. I think everything else is important, but it's ornaments on the tree. And so we need to figure out, in this uncertain environment, how do we protect those services?
Well, because the traditional sources of revenue are not keeping pace, obviously. I mean, and I did watch the meeting last night. It was a very interesting conversation that you folks had. And just for those folks who may be watching, generally what happens is the select board, usually twice a year, they have the state representative delegation out. So for us, that's Simon, it's Jim Arciero, it's Rodney Elliott, state reps, and it's also Mike Barrett, who's our state senator. And it's instructive, when you watch that interplay. And what I particularly liked about the show last night was, I mean, as you just alluded to, there were some hard issues discussed. It wasn't just a social gathering, which
That's right.
I've seen other towns do this, and they don't do it quite that way. So I think some really good dialogue came out of that. So
And I hope-
and I know you guys are interested. I mean, you don't show up just because it's pro forma and you have to do it. All right.
We're not showing up to get accolades.
Exactly.
But I will say, one thing that I've really enjoyed about the past 2 years is that we have a team of a delegation. And, in particular, my work in the House with Rodney Elliott and with Jim Arciero, I think has been really effective for Chelmsford. I think that we've been able to bring a lot more resources than one of us could alone, certainly me alone as a freshman rep with that team, and I think we're going to continue to do that, make that a priority. One thing that we've seen be a major problem across the state, and certainly in Chelmsford, has been some food insecurity issues. We've worked together to help fund the new Chelmsford Food Pantry and other initiatives that I think would be very hard to do alone.
I think that's an excellent point. And when we lost our one rep delegation back in 2000, I think it was, the complaint was, well, now we had 4 at the time, 4 state reps. It's the allegiances are going to be divided, because if a rep's main source of votes is Westford and Littleton or Lowell, then that. But I'm glad you said what you just said, and that's true if you've got competing interests, I guess, among the towns. But on those issues where it's a Chelmsford only issue, you can't do better than having 3 state reps. Because you've combined your forces, and you're all working for the town on that one particular issue, whatever it might be. So.
And I think the way that it was formally split up, Sam, there were at least 2 seats. There was one rep had only 1 precinct, and another had 2.
Correct.
And so at that point, it becomes much less
Right.
of a concern politically in terms of your political survival every 2 years. And now with 3, and the way that it's divvied up, this is a substantial portion. As you mentioned, I have more Chelmsford constituents than I do in any other town.
The way it is now, geographically makes, I mean, you could still argue that it could be better, but geographically it makes so much more sense than when we had the 4 split.
It's an improvement.
Oh,
There's
it's
no
a
doubt.
huge improvement. Yeah, it's a huge improvement, and I think we've seen good result as a result of it. And we've got a very attentive delegation. You and Jim and Rodney, you never fail to answer your calls or your questions, and you've been very responsive as far as I can tell. And what else can you ask for, right?
Thank you. And besides liking to talk with you,
Oh.
one of the reasons I come here is to encourage people to reach out. And I'm sure that your show is going to help me put on my up there my
Well, I hope
email
so.
address and my phone number.
Well-
but folks should reach out. I want people to reach out.
Why don't you plug your own show?
Yeah.
Now that we're
And
talking about that.
you can watch my own show, which I have an outstanding invitation to you, Sam,
There you
to be
go.
a guest on it.
Okay.
But it's called The Whole Truth, and I film at
boy.
Acton TV, but it shows in Chelmsford.
Yes, it does.
As well as other local stations, and it's on YouTube and on my social media stations. But we talk about a lot of the same issues and bring in local folks, a bunch of statewide folks. Talked about something that I'm looking at for next session, which is the use of cell phones in schools. There are quite a few states that are a bit ahead of us in Massachusetts.
In terms of regulating their use.
Regulating the use of cell phones in schools and aligning policy with the science that we know about the extremely detrimental effects that cell phones have in schools. So we talk about some issues like that. I've talked about MCI Concord and the Rotary and some of the regional issues that involves, and a host of
Oh, I've got a few
other
opinions
issues.
on that one.
Well, when you come on my show, Sam, we should
having
discuss
grown
it.
up with the prison there, it's very, very, very interesting. So, well, certainly you've been very busy, and it looks like we're going to have a busy 2 years going forward. And we have an outline here, but we've already talked about many of these things. Obviously, the collaboration with the town administration is pretty good, and you do the same thing with your other towns, I'm sure. So that's good. Why don't we take a minute, and I just want to touch on one issue that bothers me a little bit about the way we're constituted legislatively in Massachusetts. And we've talked about this before. Basically, we've got a one-party state, okay? I believe we have, 4 Republican senators in the state Senate, and 22, 23 legislators in the House, Republicans.
It's a minority.
Yeah, right. So we have an overwhelming majority. And then we have what is, and I'm going to expect you to jump in and tell me if I'm off base here. Okay. But I will give you, remembering that perception is reality, okay? This is what people think. So we've got that alignment. We've got what most people perceive is a very strong, iron-fisted control over both chambers in terms of the speakers, okay? And a lot of folks think that, because they perceive it to be that way, that sometimes the legislators, they feel very constrained that they really have to go along with whatever the leadership wants you to do. So there's less of an independent thought going on. And if that's true, then to me, a remedy would be if we had more of the minority party in place. So I just feel that things would be politically healthier if we had like a 60-40 or even a 65-35 split. That would give you enough folks in the minority party to present some sort of an effective opposition and require maybe a little bit more compromise. So I'm just going to let that sit out there and let you comment on what I just said.
Well, I think in order to make things more even in terms of the respective parties, there are 2 for the most part in the legislature. There are a couple of exceptions, but everyone's a Democrat or Republican. You'd have to have more people from the other party able to win elections.
Exactly.
And that has not happened, and I think there are reasons for that not happening. Obviously, people, if they truly wanted to see more of that, then I think we would see that in election results. In terms of how I approach my job with leadership, this is the question I get all the time. I think it's a really good question, especially because the Boston Globe and other news outlets love to kind of beat up on leadership. So people would naturally ask the question of, well, where do you fit into that? I work with 159 other members of the House, and there's nothing that I am able to do alone. I need other people to go along with me. And part of that is the leadership structure. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where there is not strong leadership. And in fact, we saw that down in Washington during this administration, where the Republican speaker really had no control over his body. And so they couldn't get anything done, including in bipartisan situations. Where there were policies and budget priorities that both parties had, but the speaker could not get the job done because he was too weak.
Correct. That
is certainly not the problem that we have in Massachusetts.
And I will grant you, if you had to choose between the two, and even looking at the presidency, the history shows that we are in more trouble with weak leadership than we are with strong leadership.
So we have strong leadership in Massachusetts. I can't really speak to the Senate, but I think in the House. And I think part of that is because folks understand that there's going to be a listening ear on the other side. And I can just tell you, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but I have found that when there's something that is really important for my district, I either get a yes or an explanation of why it's a no. I don't always like the explanation.
Of course not.
But you can't always say yes to 160 people, especially where those priorities may be in conflict with one another. And so my approach has been to work with my colleagues to try to better understand all of the equities so that when I make a request, it's intelligent, it's brought up at an opportune time, and that it's been effective. And I think that I have been effective with that approach so far. That's the approach that I'm going to continue to use until they stop listening to me or until it no longer is effective for my constituents. I was able to, towards the end of this session, author and get into law. The ceremonial signing will be tomorrow by the governor, a change to Massport's charter, the first major change to it since Massport was created in 1956, to require Massport to subject itself to the same types of environmental considerations that most state agencies in the state have to subject themselves to make sure that we're not doing things like overexpanding private jet airfields at Hanscom, which are causing untold amount of not only environmental damage, but degradation to our most treasured natural resources like Minuteman National Park. I wouldn't not be able to do that without collaboration.
Right.
And so that's the approach that I'm going to continue to take. I have been very happy with the amount of listening, the willingness from this leadership team to listen to a freshman and make what I believe are sincere efforts to include me in those conversations.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad I asked the question, and I'm glad you explained it the way you did. And knowing you as I do, and knowing your character, I'm going to take you at your word. And I'm glad to hear that. Okay, because again, it's not the perception that people have. To your point, you know, don't read the news that much because you're not going to get the facts. Right?
Well, you know, I think
So
maybe for some people, and I can only speak for myself, Sam, but to me, this job is not worth doing if you're just the lackey of some other legislator who doesn't even live in your community. Why would I do that?
Well said.
It's just not worth it.
No, exactly right. I mean, somebody with your background and talent could certainly go off. And in other words, you don't have to do this. This is something that you want to do and you're passionate about doing. So that, and you can see it, and it makes all the difference. So. Let's shift a little bit to national politics. You know, in case anybody missed it, we just had a national election, which I think for many people in Massachusetts anyway, I think the results came as a bit of a surprise. So I'd like to get, as a Democrat, right now in the minority party nationally, okay, I would like to get your reaction to what's just happened and maybe some insight as to why things happened the way they did. So I'll let you expound upon that.
Everybody's got their take on this.
Oh, they
right?
certainly do.
Sam, and I think when people are reading and looking at those takes, they should be cautious about believing everything you hear, because I think everybody has not only their own biases, but probably they're looking to confirm things that they were thinking or saying even before the election happened. Here's, I think, what I'd say any Democrat should be doing is starting with introspection and reflection. It is undeniable that for a year, national Democrats and the Biden team, President Biden's team, gaslit the American public. Said from the podium of the White House press office that any concerns about President Biden's health were right-wing deep fakes.
I would even argue it's longer than a year.
And that was not true. And still, when that became clear for everybody watching a debate, they were told to disbelieve the evidence of their eyes and ears. At that point, you just lose credibility. And you especially lose credibility when you did that throughout the entire primary process, such that there was no primary, such that other candidates were kept off the state ballot, if not with the direction, at least with the acquiescence of the National Party. And so the people were not given a choice during that entire process. And it was worse than lying to them, Sam, because they were basically told that they were conspiracy theorists if they had any concerns. So there was a credibility issue. And I think that credibility issue got significantly worse yesterday. And I'm referring to the pardon of Hunter Biden, which if you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about. I have some experience in the world of pardons.
I'll just make one statement on that, and then I'll let you go. As a parent, and you're a parent, on that level, putting the politics aside, I understand why he did what he did, okay? But we're talking about the President of the United States here, okay? So I'll turn it back over to you.
As a father,
yes,
I am deeply insulted that somebody would say that the reason it was okay to do what he did was
Okay.
because he was a father. As a father,
You
I
understand
want,
it. You understand. Like I said, I understand why. I don't condone what he did. I understand why he did it. But I fully agree with you. Bad as it was, it would have been better if he hadn't said anything. The explanation,
Yes.
the explanation that he gave was just, it was horrible. I'm
the
sorry.
explanation
Horrible.
made it worse.
Yes,
worse.
horrible.
As a father, I want to raise my kids to believe in the rule of law. As a father, I don't want my kids to think that they're going to get off scot-free just because of my position of power. As a father, I want my kids to understand that they need to be accountable for themselves and their own actions. As a father, I want my kids to live in a country where the principal of the country, the CEO, the chief executive of the nation, doesn't get to give special treatment to his son after campaigning for 4 years and repeatedly saying with no equivocation that he was not going to pardon his own son. And then he did it. Sam, I have personal experience with this because my first and largest trial was the trial of Sheriff Joe Arpaio down in Arizona.
Oh, yes.
And he was found guilty at trial. And then very shortly after that, prior to being sentenced, he became then President Donald Trump's very first pardon. And this is so much worse, Sam. This is so much worse. To do this as a blanket pardon for 10 years.
10 years.
For
Is it unprecedented?
an unlimited number of crimes.
I've never seen that.
And here there's no accountability.
Yeah.
There's no accountability. So this is what I believe to be a profound mistake. And for him to blame the prosecutors, who are actually the bulwark for the rule of law, and say that what they were doing unfair, that is so deleterious to the entire argument that Democrats have been trying to make. And what it says to me is that you just don't care.
Plus, they made it a lot easier for President Trump going forward, haven't they?
They have. You know, I
Because
still
now-
believe in the moral high ground.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, you know, if he tries to, and I'm sure he will, you know, exercise his prerogative in those areas as well. I mean, what's the counter argument going to be now? You have no moral ground to launch your arguments.
I believe that during the first Trump administration, the moral high ground was a significant counterweight to things that then President Trump maybe would have done but didn't or was not able to do. President Biden decided that he was going to fritter that away based on his own personal interests, and that's not okay. And other Democrats should be saying that, by the way, publicly.
I'm not surprised to hear you say it because, again, I know you and I know your character, and you're an honorable person, and I agree with you. And it does need to be said. There are a few others that are speaking out as well. And
Good, they should, and people should notice who they are and recognize that.
So so that's the big thing. So we've got about a minute left. So give some more advice to your fellow Democrats. What should they do going forward to, I think, connect better with the general population, because they lost the general population this time around?
Well, I think to me it's all about internal reflection. And I've tried to treat this moment with contrition. What could I have done? And I think we should all be thinking that. So I think if you're a member of the general public and you're looking out at public officials and the very first thing they're doing after the election is telling you that how they're going to fight Trump, then those are the wrong people.
And they're also telling you that you're uninformed and you're stupid and you're racist and you're misogynist and you're homophobic and you're all these things. And, you know, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but if you want me to vote for you, don't call me bad names, okay?
That didn't go so well last time.
I think we can start with that.
Yeah, but you know what, Sam, I still maintain great confidence. I think that we are going to find new generations of leaders who are willing to rise up. I believe our country is still the greatest place in the world. I'm so grateful that I get to raise with my wife our 3 kids here, and we're going to figure out a way to be better. I have great confidence in that still.
And that is a great way to end the show, and I agree with you. Thank you very much for coming on,
you,
and we
Sam.
won't wait so long to have you back the next time.
All right.
Very good.